Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Mead. I'm the chief psychometrician at Certiverse. And, my impetus for joining Certiverse was that I did think that, I had a meeting of the minds with Ruben and the other founders about the idea that exams could be created more efficiently. And that's the topic of today's talk. So I'm super excited to talk about that. And we also have Jill Burroughs with us.
Hi, I'm Jill Burroughs. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Certiverse. When I joined Certiverse, I think my main consideration was, as a former program manager, what were my pain points and how can I help use this platform to fix those? So that's really where I'm going to go with my talk today.
Fantastic. So to cover just a general basis, we will sort of break this up a little bit into sort of the program piece of getting your certification launched or updated, and then to the more sort of phase by phase elements of innovating exam development, and a little sort of summary on how you can do all that faster, easier, and better. So we will go ahead and kick things off with Jill.
Okay. So when I started in certification 20-some years ago, there wasn't much in the way of choices on how to develop an exam. It was a set process. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You relied on pricey consultants to do the development, and then you were at their mercy for the timelines. Having to manage all of those different vendors and get the program off the ground and get the exam to market was really inefficient. Our industry, is not really known for innovation, but in some ways, in the last 3-4 years, we've been pushed to innovate, or at least accept that we need to find alternative ways to do things. So I think most importantly, what we've realized is there isn't necessarily one correct way to do things or to develop an exam. So I kind of put together some considerations for you to use when starting a program or managing your existing program, and it outlines some of the choices that we now have and considerations that we should think about when we go to start or update an existing program. So first of all, I'd say choosing vendors can be one of the most important and difficult things to do. Managing vendors can be very time consuming. And if you get to the point where you need to hire someone to manage all of your vendors, you probably have too many vendors, or the vendors aren't providing an efficient service. So one thing to consider when you're looking for vendors, look for ones that provide multiple services so you can consolidate. This is going to free up your internal resources. And many will actually give you a discount if you bundle services together. So you can save time, you can save money. I think those are choices that we didn't necessarily have many years ago. We only had, 9 different vendors, one for every different thing. So that's a new consideration I think that we can all think about. And on the topic of vendors, I think we can start asking ourselves, what are we relying on vendors for that we could do ourselves better, faster, cheaper? I think at one point I had 9 delivery vendors, just delivery. And that didn't count all the other vendors that I was managing. And again, I was completely at the mercy of their timelines. It'd take them weeks, months to QA and publish an exam for me. And self-publishing wasn't available then, but it is now. And I think just that one change, that one choice that we've been giving to allow self-publishing is game changer. So consider self-publishing. Ask when you're interviewing vendors if they allow self-publishing. You can not only publish, but you can make on-the-fly changes to your exams. Obviously not ones that will hurt your psychometrics, Alan. But just those quick grammar edits that you see in your exam, and then you're like, oh no, it's going to take me 5 weeks to republish it. If with self-publishing, you can do it on the fly, you can do it for yourself, and not to mention you get to control all those timelines. So I think that's really a new option that we have, the self-service, that can be really efficient for your program. Another thing to consider is your data and your data flow. So the Certiverse system, we allow data to flow from beginning to end. And what that does is it allows you to have more control over your data. It's more frictionless for your candidates, and many less headaches for you. The less integrations that take place, the less integrations you have to manage. And obviously there are security benefits from having that data not stored across multiple vendors and platforms. So again, when you're considering vendors for all of these things, think about how that data flow looks and all the different places you'll be storing your data. Okay, next slide, Alan.
I think I went too fast. This is where we want to be, right?
That's all right.
My apologies.
No worries. So the next thing we're going to talk about are all of our delivery options and some considerations that we can take to heart now that we have all of these amazing choices that maybe we didn't have 3 years ago, or some programs had already adopted remote proctoring prior to the pandemic, but as of 3 years ago, we saw quite a swift and maybe forced adoption of remote proctoring. And so I think that we all can see that that is probably here to stay. And so when you're considering your options for delivery, think about why you were doing in-person testing. I think the argument that it's more secure than the remote proctoring, I think that's been researched many, many times over the last 3 years and proven that that is not true. And I can tell you that in-person testing isn't as secure as we would have liked it to be, or that any of us think it was, or I wouldn't have been employed as test security consultant for the last 20 some years. So when we talk about remote proctoring, there are a few different variations. And I think you need to consider your own program and your own risk tolerance when you are looking at different remote proctoring options. Okay, so let's talk about the choices. AI only. AI only means that an artificial intelligence is detecting strange behavior by a candidate and flagging it. To me, this is very similar to a record and review, but it just has kind of a technology boost. If you have a low stakes exam, this might be all you need. There's also an AI assisted live proctoring. So you do actually have a live human proctor available. But the ratios of the proctor to candidates is much higher. And the AI is actually in the background checking for the candidates doing questionable behavior, and then will alert the human proctor to go to that screen or go to that candidate. I think when we're talking about having humans involved in any part of the process of proctoring, you have to consider human error, or just the ability for a human to focus on many things. And I think that AI, just having it consistently monitor behind the scenes, does give the proctors kind of a boost in their ability to properly monitor candidates. And then, of course, there's the traditional remote proctoring that I think we're all very aware of now and very versed in, where there is a live proctor, there's live interaction between the candidates and the proctors. And so when I talk about remote proctoring and I talk about any of these things, I think the one most important consideration in remote proctoring is a secure browser. So when you are talking to possible delivery vendors, make sure you ask this question: do they have a secure browser? Is that available? What does that look like? Not all delivery vendors, remote proctoring vendors, have secure browsers. Some will try to tell you that a secure browser really isn't all that important. It is important. And I think as a prior program manager, that's, I think, would be my one hard and fast rule, that if I'm delivering remotely for any reason, I'm using a secure browser. So next slide, Ellen. Okay, and so we can't talk about AI or anything without talking about content creation. So in the past, I think we all did in-person meetings. I know I did a week for a JTA, I did a week for item writing, another week for review and standard setting, and it added up. It was an extra $30,000 per workshop to cover those travel costs for the SMEs, not to mention large dinners and entertainment outings. It was just a huge expense when we're talking about content creation. So knowing that, most SMEs love these events, a lot of certification managers love these events. So I'm not saying you have to completely do away with them, but I think you need to consider or at least leverage the ability to create content remotely. You don't have to do it all or nothing. You could do it asynchronously, and there's benefits to doing it asynchronously. Or you can continue to do it synchronously and plan time with your SMEs. But either way, you're going to save a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of time within your exam development timeline. And like I said, you don't have to do all or nothing, but just consider leveraging the ability to do that for some of your development. It will make a huge difference. One note I will say with remote development work, use a secure platform. Those are available to us now. They used to not be available, and we used spreadsheets, sending those back and forth. I don't recommend spreadsheets. I don't recommend hiring a consultant that uses a spreadsheet. There are much easier and more secure ways to do remote development now. So, considerations in AI. There are a lot of questions, concerns around the use of AI, but we might as well embrace it because it's not going anywhere. When we were having a discussion, Alan and I, about this,
I lost the.
Oh, I think you just jumped ahead.
Yeah, I did something crazy.
There you go.
Sorry.
Alan said to me, AI will not take your job, but people using AI might. And at the very least, they will outpace you. So AI is not a panacea, but we do need to embrace it. So I recommend, do your own homework, do your research, talk to your own legal department, know what your risks or your tolerances are around AI, but just using AI to build out your item bank is a game changer. And like Alan so smartly said, AI is not coming for your job, but the person who is using AI are going to completely outpace you. So I strongly recommend considering using AI in item development, content development. And there are a lot of other uses for AI in development. Not only can you create larger banks, but you can do a whole host of other things with AI. And Alan's going to talk to that later. So you can go to the next slide, Alan. So I think I've tried to present some considerations that you can use when creating or managing your programs. Like I said, there's no longer just one right way of doing things. At Certiverse, we adhere to the standards for educational and psychological testing, and we've implemented a set of best practices that follow those. And I hope that the considerations that I've laid out will help you build out your program. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Alan, and he's going to go through some ways to improve on the exam development process.
Sorry for the very inexpert slide flipping. So, in thinking about how do you improve the exam development process, I think there's three tactics or strategies. I don't know which these are. One is automation and partial automation. And we've all worked with automated systems and seen how much more efficient they were. Another is AI. And I think of both of those as appearing like AI. I guess when I say AI, I really mean, machine learning for the most part. And I think that most people perceive both of those as AI. But the difference is automation is an algorithm that's written by a human, and machine learning is an algorithm that the AI learned by itself. And then I think there's also a third tactic is innovation streamlining. I'll have an example of that. And so we all know about a little bit at least about automation and innovation, but AI is still a new thing. And I thought it was worth saying the three tasks that AI can help you with. So if your work or somebody else's work or your SME's work involves these three things, then you can apply AI to streamline that work. And we're all familiar with the generation of text. We've seen how well it works in not in every case, but in many cases, it writes items or writes text like a human would write text. Items are a little more specialized. My research on writing items suggests that the items are a useful first draft. A few of them are useless. A few of them are perfect. And the vast majority in the middle requires some editing. But a SME using AI is more productive than a SME not using AI. So generation is clear, and I'll return to that briefly. But the other thing that these models can do that is less well understood is classifying text. If you think about it, classifying something is really generating a word or a phrase, and you can actually use the generation capabilities of the model. And if those aren't, and the current generation of models, one of the distinctions is that they're good at this. We used to spend a lot of effort, data scientists used to spend a lot of effort creating something called sentiment analyses so that you could analyze things like tweets and determine whether a tweet was positive or negative. And then if it was negative, you could have a customer service person, go in and remediate. Sentiment analyses it was complicated. It was a bespoke model that required a lot of effort to create. These models are very good at arbitrary choices of classification. And if they're not good enough, you can use a process called fine tuning to make them better. And then the other capability of these models that's also not well understood is the ability to find similar content. These models can tell you which pieces of content, so text today and someday text and images and audio and other media are most similar to each other. So you can imagine having a bank and searching that bank. You can certainly do that today with keywords, but what these models allow you to do is find things like I've searched for sample size, and I've had it pull up items that use phrases like, how many people do you need in order to do this? And the word sample and size don't appear, but the concept of sample size appears. So that's a really important capability. So then I thought, well, let's go through the steps and talk about how these tactics can help you. And, the beginning is to have a vision for the exam. And although I think that there's some things that AI, for example, can make suggestions and provide inspiration, I can't emphasize enough the importance of having a good vision. Like, for example, deciding what level the exam is going to be. Is it going to be an entry-level exam? And is there going to be another one stacked on top of it? Or is this the one exam and it needs to cover the breadth? So I think this is an important step that I don't have a lot of things to say about making it better. But then you roll into doing some sort of job or role analysis. And there's lots of things we could do. The platform provides a framework. I guess here I'm speaking of the Certiverse platform that provides a framework for asynchronous collaboration. The automation coordinates the SMEs as they elicit their task statements or knowledge statements. It keeps track of their comments. It keeps track of the status of those statements. When the statements are finalized, our system will automatically turn them into a survey. It's literally like a minute later, you might have a survey. You can go in and tweak some of the parameters or not and have a survey that's ready to be administered. You could either generate a link or add people, and the system will email them. And then as that survey data comes in, the system is automatically doing a data cleaning step to determine whether or not the data look like they're, the person was attentive. Did they seem like they were paying attention? Is their data complete? And it's analyzing that data so it's available right away. And and those processes aren't really AI based. We do have a little bit of AI in creating the statements so that you create them in a good form, so you don't have to sort of be taught how to do that. The system will try and enforce that. And AI could be used to suggest task statements. If you go to ChatGPT and you say, what are the tasks of a plumber, it will generate, what are the tasks that a plumber performs on the job. It will generate a list of plausible tasks that would be appropriate as a first step for subject matter experts. And it can also classify those into domains, or you could have your subject matter experts do that. And here's an example of an innovation, or what I mean by an innovation. It's a silly little thing that anyone could use, but what's typical in exam development is that you do that step of eliciting tasks. You have a long list of tasks. You do a survey. The survey tells you which tasks are most important. And then you have to have another meeting with the subject matter experts to go over that list and classify those statements into domains. And we require that when the task statement is written, it gets tagged with the domain. That cuts out the later meeting, making that meeting not necessary. And it allows us to generate the initial draft blueprint. That's an important part of being able to generate the draft blueprint is that we already know the linkage between the domain and the statements. So in the step of exam blueprint, we, automation, as I described with our system, can create an initial draft blueprint. It calculates the domain weights based on the JTA results. You end up with a weighted outline of, here are the topics of the exam, and here's the weight that they should have. But those don't have a description, but you do have information about them. You have a set of tasks that were important. So this is where AI can step in and suggest domain descriptions. They might not be perfect, but they're going to be a good first draft for a subject matter expert to then finalize. And the platform, our platform with these blueprints, provides a framework for asynchronous collaboration. People can go in and modify the blueprint, and they can approve the blueprint. There are people who can review the blueprint. So the system sort of coordinates that so that you're done. Then once you are done with the blueprint, generating item assignments in our system is automatic. And they're generated in such a way, they're calculated according to the weights on the blueprint, that if you write all those items, you will have a content valid pool from which to draw one or more forms. You'll decide how many forms you want. And our system is, one of the questions is, how do you assign those to SMEs? And conceivably, you could imagine an AI approach that knows about the SMEs and assigns them. But the way we sidestep that is our system allows the SMEs to self-select the item assignments. So they get a window where they see all the assignments that are available, grouped by the blueprint topics, and they choose what they want to write about until that topic is closed, and then they have to choose a different topic. And then I talked briefly about it, Jill talked briefly about it. Writing exam content is probably the biggest item on this side, but I won't belabor the point. Our system provides automation that coordinates those asynchronous authors and the reviews and all the steps that are involved. The system will remind authors if they have feedback that they need to come revise their item. It'll send them an email. If they need to do a review, it'll send, that is to say, if there are items waiting in the review queue, it'll send an email telling them there are items waiting in the review queue. And AI has a lot of application here. If you want to use it, it can write first drafts of multiple choice items. The research that I alluded to before suggests that those first drafts save SMEs time, but they're not perfect. We had some hope that the items could just go into an item review. I think that would be a bad idea, at least with the current crop of models and the current method we're using to generate the items. I don't think they're good enough to go into review, but I think they're good enough for a SME to make them good items. And AI can write other exam content within the Certiverse system today. You can have it generate scenarios. You can ask it to suggest distractors. So there are other ways that AI can help you other than just writing the items. And then another issue is matching the item to existing learning materials. AI can help with that third bullet where it looks for similar things. And then our system does a little NLP to enforce the syntactic item writing rules. If you're writing an item and you say all of the above is one of the responses, it says, hey, wait a minute, that's against best practices. And it's just like spell check. Like, you notice it immediately and you could fix it right then. And I think it makes the whole process more efficient. So
I'm going to pause you. I'm sorry, Alan. I'm going to pause just for 1 second to set an expectation. I think we're going to go a little bit past 12:30, especially with some questions. But rather than going too quickly and skipping over things, we'll just keep that time. But if anyone's not able to stay for that entire time, we can definitely get you a recording afterwards. But so proceed with all information needed, Alan. I just wanted to kind of set that expectation.
Okay. I was actually looking at the time. We've got like 2.5 minutes. I was going to try and fit it in, but I'm excited about the possibilities. Our system currently, the review is entirely done by humans, and the platform provides a lot of support for that. I think that's actually quite important. But I'm excited about the possibility that that same sort of enforcement of syntactic rules can be extended to enforcing things like, is the item on topic? Is the item written to the appropriate complexity? Maybe is the item biased or inappropriate? And maybe some other things isn't clear, for example. So I think extending the AI assistance into exam content, into the review, is quite important. And then I think producing forms is a great example of where I think automation is better than AI. automated test assembly is or CAT or Loft or any of these formats that are been designed by a psychometrician, I think, are more effective than using AI. But one of the things that happens at this step is that you find item enemies, and that capability of finding similar items can be used to identify item enemies. And I think that's going to be a killer app of AI. And then setting cut scores. I think the platform automation, is quite important to being efficient. For us, for Certiverse, we have a interface for the subject matter experts to remotely and asynchronously review the items in a secure environment. It provides a standard interface. It records their comments. It calculates the statistics that you need. It calculates the standard deviation and the average. I am excited, and this is looking a little more farther down the line, about the possibility of coaching people so that the exams, so that the results are better in real time. So, if I had to summarize those: automatic and frictionless, asynchronous, using AI and innovation. And although Jill mentioned it, as the psychometrician, I want to say a word about reliability and validity. We've been designed from the ground up to adhere to the same standards that everyone else is using. We would defend an exam program developed on our system, the same way that you would defend your exam program, or that anyone following best practices would follow the exam program. Our system is modular, and there are circumstances where one size doesn't fit all. But if you follow our advice, you will be going through all the same steps that anyone else would. So I apologize for that. We've gone a little over. Do we have anybody who's sticking around and has a question?
We did have a couple questions come in through the Q&A. One being, and I think, you mentioned a little bit about, on the horizon as far as guidance on higher cognitive levels, or at least matching and identifying cognitive levels. But the question was, do you have suggestions on how to use AI to create items that are at the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy as opposed to just the remembering level?
I don't think that that Bloom's taxonomy fits. Bloom's taxonomy was designed with a particular purpose. If you go read the, I think, Anderson et al. Book, which is the most recent book where they had the revision, they talk about Bloom's taxonomy as being originally devised to exchange items. And I'm not quite sure how that would work. But if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, I think it works well for objectives. I think you could easily write a learning objective that's at level 6. I think that it works less well for multiple choice items or items in general. I think that you may not be able to fit a level 6 item into a multiple choice item. And I doubt that unless you can articulate that you'll be successful in encouraging AI to do so. I wish I had a more positive response.
And then we also had a question about how the item review phase can take a long time to complete due to the discussions involved with the SMEs. So how can Certiverse accelerate that process?
So here's the dirty secret. I was trained as a social psychologist, and there's different kinds of social psychology. The old school was very interested in groups, and they did a lot of groups research, and there are tasks that groups do well, and there are tasks that groups don't do well. And if you want a group to generate as much output as possible and be as efficient as possible, you should limit their discussions. Their discussions are not useless, but they are not on the path of efficiency. So the Certiverse review process does not encourage discussion, and that's how we make it more efficient. And some SMEs would dislike that. I can see their point, but in terms of efficiency, it's more efficient for a SME to review the item, give their opinion, have the author interact with that feedback, have the item go back into the review queue, and have another set of eyes review the item and render a judgment, as opposed to having a group of people discuss it. We do have clients that have meetings where they discuss the items in groups, and those meetings are long, and I don't think the system has anything to make those meetings shorter other than avoiding them. Wish I had a more positive answer to that, or a magical answer.
Always. And then if you're using AI for item writing or content matching, is there any concern if you are not using a secure version of ChatGPT, for example, that you're inputting exam content into a public space? And does this increase opportunities for duplicates of your exam to exist somewhere on the internet?
So
The
my answer,
$8 million question.
so my answer to that is that you should do what your lawyer tells you to do, and your lawyer should worry about this. But if you think that you can Google your exam content, like I've Googled exam content to see if that content was on the web, and if you think you can do that, then you can use AI. I shouldn't say that. If you think you can do that, then you should be able to find a model like OpenAI through an API or through an opt-out clause. They've said that they won't use your data, or you can use the new secure enterprise version either through OpenAI or Azure. But I think you should not just assume that nothing will happen, but for example, in the Certiverse system, we use API calls. They've agreed that they won't use that data. So I don't think that you're putting it into the public domain. I guess my question for anybody who's concerned about this is, how do I access, let's say you put a secret into the model. How do I access that secret? And no one has ever been able to explain that. The models could conceivably memorize something, but that's not the way they're built. It's antithetical to their nature to memorize something that they see once. That's not the way the models are built. And so I think it's very unlikely. But if your items are super secret, then then maybe that's not a good idea, or caution should be your watchword, and you should definitely follow whatever your lawyer tells you to do.
Yeah, and I think to Ellen's point, so if you're using the Certiverse platform, we're using a closed model. We're using API calls. If you put your stuff in the public ChatGPT, that is not anything that we could comment on whether or not that's secure. Personally, I would not do that. So if you're looking to do this, you're going to need to do it on a closed model with API calls. And again, we do not offer legal advice. Please talk to your lawyer.
I think another related issue is that the Copyright Office seems very pessimistic about registering copyrights for content that's generated solely by AI. And for example, they seem to think their definition of solely seems to be extremely broad. So again, question for a lawyer. But if registering your copyright on your items is an important part to defending your items, I think that's far more of an issue for you than the possibility that you're putting your items in the public domain. Somebody once said you lose your IP as soon as you put your items into any window. I can't imagine how that's possible. That seems like a hyperbole, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you.
And I don't think there's laws actually decided yet on any of this. And I
That's
think
true. Things are very uncertain.
Everything's still up in the air. So,
other questions?
That is all that we had entered. Anyone wants to raise a quick hand if they're still working on one? Otherwise, we will thank everyone for their time today. Yeah, I think we're all set. All right. Well, thank you all so much. You can reach out to Alan or Jill directly, or to us in general at answers@certiverse.com if you would like additional info. And this will be available as a recording on our website as well. So you can check for that in a little bit. Thanks so much, and hope we see you next time.